Thank you so much for having me here today on this call. I just want to start by expressing my admiration for the global food security cluster, but certainly for all of those of you who are based in the field as running the food security clusters in context where the ICRC is obviously very active and where we recognize the enormous work that is being done. Of course, our role more broadly within the cluster is more as an observer. Unfortunately, we're not always able to contribute as extensively as other partners within the system. However, we see very concretely enormous value of the interactions and collaborations that we have with the food cluster, including my own experience in the field of engaging very closely with the food security cluster. So we start with that. Big congratulations on the 10 years and may the good work continue. I think the scene has already been set by those who spoke before me. 2020 has thus far been an extremely difficult year for millions across the world. I like the acronym of the 3 C's, which is exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about conflict, protracted conflict in many situations. We're talking about climate, which this year, not only are we in an environment of a changing climate, but there have also been very concrete climate hazards. We have seen floods this year, which were very extensive and very damaging, and certainly we've also seen locusts. Now, in terms of COVID and the added layer of complexity that COVID has brought to the situation, especially in conflict-affected countries, I think we've all now established very clearly that the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19 is arguably larger, more wide-ranging, and certainly will have much longer-term reverberations than the actual health impact. We saw in recent months there was a bit of a more positive narrative around the global economic situation. There was some hope that the downturn would not be as sharp as had been previously predicted. However, now, as is the case in many of the countries where you are right now, we are seeing a second wave. And this could have very devastating consequences. Now it remains to be seen what the cumulative effects will be of potentially lengthy and potentially recurring restrictions. And the impact could indeed be far worse than what was first estimated in the first half of 2020. Now, the economic recovery in all of this will depend largely on how far-reaching these restrictive policies are going to be by governments and the ability of these governments and their central banks to compensate these impacts with additional economic measures. Of course, you all heard the news in recent days that there is potentially a vaccine on its way. A mass vaccination, of course, will be an absolute game changer for potential recovery. However, there is no doubt that this vaccine, once and if it is improved, will not necessarily be reaching the populations in those hard-to-reach areas that Jan Egeland was speaking about previously. Now, countries with active ongoing conflict, accumulated economic imbalances and high public debt and deficit levels will be among the most economically affected by the crisis. Of course, this comes as no surprise. We've already seen millions of people being pushed into poverty. You've all seen the predictions of the World Bank. I think now we're talking about a potentially additional 150 million people who may fall into poverty in 2021. Now, from where we're sitting, from the ICRC perspective, based on an index that we have developed, unsurprisingly, we see that countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, Somalia, Syria, and Sudan are amongst the most economically vulnerable, we're talking about country level here, to the current the pandemic. So these are countries that are facing multi-layered and protracted conflicts. They have a high share of informal employment and a high prevalence of food insecurity and poverty rates. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I am aware of that. Now, for other countries, aspects such as unsustainable debt levels and potential global inflation are extremely high risks. To zoom in a bit more on the conflict environment that we're facing today, so it was mentioned earlier that indeed 10 out of the biggest food crises today have been identified as being in conflict-affected countries. So just to give you an image of that, today there are around 100 armed conflicts around the world. These are conflicts that are classified as conflicts. We know that there's many situations of violence, but these are ones that have been classified by the ICRC as conflicts. That involves 60 different states and around 100 non-state armed groups, although I should note that there is a multitude of armed groups out there. And we have already, since the 90s, seen a multiplication of armed conflicts in the world. Now, of course, COVID, as I said at the beginning, adds another layer. The pandemic and its socioeconomic aftershocks are deepening fragility. They're, of course, increasing the humanitarian needs. You're seeing this on a daily basis. They're accentuating the impact of conflict and violence, and they're opening the doors to further stigmatization of certain groups. And beyond this, increasing global poverty, heightening instability and tensions, and also reversing some of those very hard-won development gains that have been made over recent years. Of course, all this translates into very tangible impacts for the populations that you and, well, that we are all working for, if you will, our clients, if you look at it that way. So the ICRC did a survey amongst our beneficiaries in 24 countries, a few months back, and around 80% of those we interviewed had already seen a very direct impact on their livelihoods, either losing their jobs or seeing a dramatic reduction in their income. In some of the African contexts where we did these interviews, that number was as high as 98%. So the impact on people's livelihoods is very, very direct. And we're talking about people who are living hand to mouth here. Daily laborers, people working in the informal sector, subsistence farmers, herders, fishermen, women-headed households running small businesses, disabled working, in our case, small businesses in the markets, transporting goods on their little moped in the market. And beyond this, displaced persons and others who are marginalized. These are people who don't have access to social welfare schemes, financial systems, they don't have savings, and they don't have access to basic healthcare. Every financial decision that these people make is a choice between feeding their family, paying for schooling or healthcare, or investing in their livelihoods. These are impossible decisions. And a sick day could translate into a lost meal for their families. Just on that note, and also staying on the survey that we did, and I just want to note this was done a few months ago, only 6% of those we interviewed said that they have enough savings to go through a protracted shock. Now, importantly, from the ICRC perspective, we have really seen that COVID, or maybe not due to COVID, but during the pandemic, if you will, we've observed a very clear fragmentation and multiplication, of parties to armed conflicts around the world. We've seen a definite multiplication of non-state armed groups. And this, of course, as many of you are probably seeing very concretely on the field, is making it extremely hard for us also to work. We're seeing non-state armed groups and criminal gangs who have inserted themselves into the gaps that have been left behind, either in terms of helping the population directly, or even taking opportunities to increase their own attacks.
Sorry,
maybe I will.
One more minute, huh?
Perfect, thank you. I will conclude on a few points where I think that what's very important about COVID is it really a game changer? Because that's how we're all talking about it. We're talking about COVID as though it's going to fundamentally change everything we do and how we do it. I think within food security, I think great strides have been made in recent years, if not in a recent decade, in terms of the responses that are on the ground. However, COVID is, of course, an accelerator. I think that in terms of access and how we deal with gaining access as humanitarians, but also ensuring access of movement of people and access of people to their livelihood, their means of production, and to food, certainly, is a key element that we need to continue to work on. I think there are huge opportunities for developing perhaps new and innovative responses. There's definitely opportunities for data digitalization, which have been mentioned, where I know the food security cluster is very advanced. Localizations, it's been touched on, it will be touched again on tomorrow, but I think, again, COVID will accelerate this in the conflict in the areas where we work. And I think last but not least, there is a very clear case for more and broader and more deep collaboration and coordination, because the funding environment that we're working in is not the same as it was, and it will not be the same for several years. I think we're going to, whether we like it or not, we're going to be thrust into a situation where we have to collaborate better to really ensure that we find the most relevant solutions for the populations that we're trying to support. And we have to partner. We have to partner within the humanitarian sector. We have to partner between the humanitarian sector and the development sector. We have to partner beyond these sectors. We have to partner with the private sector, with governments. We have to look at the global, the regional, the national, and the local level. And I hope that mechanisms such as the cluster system will be an excellent entry point for what I hope to be certainly a productive future for all of us and for the benefit of the people we try to help. Thank you.